So recently I used this Taylor GS Mini Coil Plus at a gig, and after the gig, a couple of the boys were having a go, and one of them asked me whether it was possible to put extra light strings on the GS Mini. Now this is brand new, this guitar, so it's got the 13s straight out of the factory, which I'm finding fairly comfortable and have no issues with. And I thought I'd make a quick video basically outlining some of the considerations you might need to make when going down from the recommended string gauge on a GS Mini. So Taylor recommend 13s for the GS Mini, which is highly unusual for a small body guitar. Usually bigger body guitars take quite a lot more tension than smaller body guitars. Light gauge strings can be put on cutaways or small guitars like this, like parlor guitars and travel guitars and that sort of thing. The heavier gauge strings, I think, on a GS Mini add to projection. So when you pick it up, it'll just sound louder. It'll sound like it's got more body. And I think that's what Taylor is counting on when you first pick up a GS Mini, that it just sounds big like a normal guitar. The other thing with heavy gauge strings is they actually add to tuning stability on a guitar. With smaller guitars though, because they take a little less tension, it might create problems. It doesn't seem to create any problems with the GS Mini. But there are some considerations if you were to go down a couple of steps. Now, what I've got here, so this is a 2012 G and it has 10s on it. So the lightest gauge you can possibly get. It shouldn't really be an issue putting lighter gauge strings on a GS Mini. The only difference will be is that you'll notice that it will have less projection, so it won't be as loud. When I first put lighter gauge strings on this, I didn't have many problems until about, I think, a fortnight later, it started to relax and I noticed buzzing. But what I did was I just basically adjusted the truss rod and it plays fine now. With lighter gauge strings, they'll sound more delicate, they'll sound brighter, and they'll obviously be easier to play. Now, the GS Mini is already very easy to play, so this will just melt in your hands once you change them to 10s. There is a delicate hand that's required to play with lighter gauge strings. So that's something to consider as well when you drop down string gauges on the GS Mini. But yeah, what you'll find is that it's probably better for playing at home. If you're playing at a gig or whatever, it's probably best to use a pickup and just make sure that your balances are right, because it won't have the same amount of volume that the GS Mini with 13s will. In terms of overall sound, lighter gauge strings will have a slightly different tonal quality. What I notice from this guitar compared to the Koa with the heavier gauge strings is when you play a chord, for example, you'll hear each individual notes, whereas with the Koa and its heavier gauge strings, the notes tend to blur together, and it gives a different sort of tonal quality. Not a bad thing. The other thing you'll notice is if you have really large hands like I do, that the lighter gauge strings will actually be better to play. The heavier gauge strings feel just a tad bit too cramped, so that extra little bit of diameter actually affects the playability of the guitar as far as I'm concerned. If you've got slender, small fingers, you probably won't notice that as much. So overall, don't be worried about changing the string gauge, and don't be afraid of going down to 10s if that's something that you want. My preference are usually 11s to 12s for live, and 10s if I'm just around the house. That's why I've got 10s on this one, which I use just to kick around and write songs on, and I'll probably put 11s as a starting point on the Koa Plus for live. The only thing to note that is if you do drop the string gauge, particularly if you go from 13s to 10s, that you make sure that you monitor the neck tension and adjust the truss rod if need be. All right, so I'll give you a bit of a sample of these two guitars together. Now, it's not a like-for-like comparison because this one has just cheap D'Addario strings on it and the other one has coated D'Addario strings on it. And obviously, they're different guitars. This is 12 years old and the GS Mini was released in 2010. So this is about as old as it can get. All right, so I hope you found this video useful. If you did, please leave a like and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.